Great. Good morning, everybody. My name's Alan Reed. I'm Director of Client Projects with Heart Square. I'm delighted to welcome everybody to our webinar this morning on aging systems and how non-profits can help modern supporter engagement whilst tackling all the challenges of siloed data and systems that weren't designed necessarily for modern supporter engagement in 2020. So I'm pleased also to welcome our panel today. We've got Colette Langley and Dan Keyworth. Colette, could I ask you to introduce yourself first, please, and then Dan?
Yep, hello everybody. My name's Colette Langley. I'm a sales manager at Blackboard Europe, and I manage the customer account executive team. We manage around half of our CRM customers across the UK and Europe, which is around 900 of our medium to large organizations, enterprise level organizations. And I've been with Blackboard for 8 years now.
And hi, I'm Dan Keyworth. I'm our Director of Customer Success across our international markets group here at Blackboard. So I work with our customers across Canada, here in the EMEA region, and across Asia Pacific, how to help them get the most from our solutions and how can we ultimately help them to be as successful as possible. And I've been with Blackboard for about 5.5 years, and before that was part of the executive fundraising team in the University of Oxford Development Office. So worked across technology and fundraising with that organisation.
Fantastic. And Colette, I love your headshot photo. There's not enough cheery news out there, so that's really good. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a little bit of an introduction into the challenges that we're seeing in the not-for-profit sector, but just a little bit of housekeeping first. So I'll keep the information about Heart Square incredibly brief. I'll just mention that all we do is we manage and deliver projects in the not-for-profit sector in the UK. That's it. We don't do any other type of work, and we're fiercely religiously independent of any technology or provider, which puts us in a good position to be able to advise on costs, benefits, and otherwise of any particular solution or solution provider. So that's enough about that. A little bit of webinar etiquette, please. So the session is being recorded, and we're going to make the webinar available on to the delegates on YouTube. And we'll do that if you can please, we'll send you the link if you can please provide your feedback form afterwards. Just to make the point, we're not remotely interested in your data, and we are not allowed to use it even if we were. The reason for the feedback form is to help us run better webinars. We do these at no cost, of course, and anything that you can say that will help us run us better, good and bad, please let us have it on the feedback form. During the webinar, if you could use the Q&A box for anything you want to direct to the panel on the Q&A on the webinar, please do it there, and then we'll tend to do Q&A questions at the end. If you're having any kind of difficulty then with technology, then please use the chat box. But for anything directed at the panel, please use the Q&A. If you put something in the chat box, then one of our team will get back to you and try and help you out. And then in general, unless you're speaking, this is for the panel primarily, then check your microphone is on mute. I'll just start off with some research. So Heart Square does a lot of research into the not-for-profit sector every year, and one of the research studies we did recently was on not-for-profits, predominantly charities, and meeting stakeholder expectations, the challenges that they faced in meeting stakeholder expectations. So the survey included, or the respondents included, 600 non-profits. The majority of whom are considering or who are going through some kind of major change project. And the majority of major change projects have a strong technology element, although by no means all of them. What we got from the survey was not a great comment on technology used in the not-for-profit sector. So what we got was that over 60% of charities, even very large charities with large budgets, still said that they were on older systems that weren't necessarily talking to each other very well, and making life harder in terms of getting that single supporter view that everyone's been talking about for the last 30 years. So a solid majority said that they were using older siloed systems. Over 40% said that they were on systems that they are so old that they were worried about them being a burning platform. Essentially systems that may not have a great roadmap in front of them, or are losing market share very rapidly. So over 40% said that they were actually worried about the operational safety of their business using systems that were old enough to be considered burning platforms, which is startling. And then where we got to the great majority was saying that their current systems and access to data essentially were stifling innovation and causing lost opportunity within the organization. In other words, there's almost no point in having a good idea because everything is impossible. We'd like to run this exciting campaign in response to what's happening in 2020. But unfortunately, it involves setting off a project, dozens of people being involved, a backlog of a year to wait for anything, or various other stories like that. And unfortunately, it then becomes there's no point in having a good idea because of poor access to systems and data. A surprising thing as well that came out of that was that, but it does make sense, there was a lot of comment about if staff have very poor access to systems and data, or systems that don't support their work very well and poor access to data, it leads to a lot of disillusionment and actual staff turnover. So there was a lot of comment about that, where people know if they're able to do a good job, people know if they're able to execute the mission, and where they're not, it generates a lot of staff difficulties. And actually, we're running a webinar on leadership in the not-for-profit sector and tackling that particular issue. So not a very encouraging picture from an awful lot of nonprofits. So we then do some deep dives, so some insights into why is that the case, what are causing the issues. So the challenges are that for forever, everyone has been talking about the supporter-centric system. We all know what we're supposed to be achieving. And it's amazing that in every sales presentation, software salespeople will talk about the 360-degree view, or the single view of the truth, as if it's revelatory. Whereas actually, we all know that people have been talking about that since the 1990s and before. So why is it still this huge challenge? So that the supporter-centric view has the basic requirement that everything you know about a person or an organization is available to your staff without them having to go off and ask other colleagues what's in your spreadsheet and what's in your system. So every bit of data, every bit of fundraising information, every bit of tracking of their history and information with you, all communications information, everything that that they have clicked through or shown an interest in should all be again tracked against the individual. Everything that they do on your website in terms of consuming content or responding to surveys, ideally is then of course tracked against the individual and available to you. And likewise, all social listening. If they're reposting, liking, saying that this is content that we want to engage with, then that is also tracked back against the individual. So we've all known this for an awful lot of time, and it should enable business people within your organization to just do very fundamental things. Often these fundamental things start off with the sentence, give me a list of, give me a target campaign group of, and that target campaign group might be, for instance, give me a list of people who were interested enough to click on this email that we sent last week and to read more, and who haven't done anything with us in the last 6 months, and attended this event or did this bit of community fundraising with us last year. Whatever the give me a list of is, it will tend to involve data from multiple different places. And if that's not available to people, then simply people don't do it. The initiative doesn't happen, the approach doesn't happen, the campaign doesn't happen, and people just kind of give up. So these are the challenges that we're hearing about from the survey data. So we asked, why are there so many systems and so many places that the data is being kept? And what we got back was actually, we need different systems for doing different things. So even a medium complicated charity or not-for-profit has a whole series of different things that historically weren't available in generic CRM systems. So essentially they would then break out and go and buy a system to manage legacies, go and buy a system to manage campaigns and tracking of responses against campaigns, have a specialist system for income processing that of course has to join up to everything from Virgin Money to Everyday Hero to Just Giving and you know, a dozen other sources. So the result is that because people in charities reported that they need all of these specialist areas of functionality, they go off historically and perhaps over 20 years, they get these different systems that all have a little bit of the supporters' data. I'm sure this is a position that many on the webinar are used to and familiar with and recognize as a challenge. An additional part of the challenge that came through from the survey is that nonprofits now are reporting that they're having to deal with more audiences than they ever have before. So historically, when the majority of fundraising systems or older CRM systems were acquired, the developers of those systems and what they were bought for were essentially for doing transactions. So if your fundraising team had what they needed and the finance team could see the money flowing through and you were able to get campaign emails out the door, then that was everybody happy. But of course, in 2020 onwards, pretty much everyone wants access to data and they want it through multiple devices. So the challenge that we got is that as well as the existing functionalities that we just saw and the traditional audiences for those fundraising systems, they still need their transactions. They still need high volume, complex income processing where income can be attached to multiple campaigns, can be spread and ring fenced and dealt with in various different ways, can be managed through HMRC and gift aid and all of the volume of different income sources. They still need all of that stuff. But in addition to that, of course, there are all of these different people demanding access to data and demanding to interact with the charity in some way. And if you don't satisfy those audiences, if you don't find a channel for them, then what you get is, of course, that your colleagues will break out in self-defense. They'll start a new data source. They'll go and acquire a new system. And again, the supporter data gets ever more fractured. People get frustrated, and the cycle continues. Finally, of course, what we're seeing from the survey data from over 600 charities is that people are being expected to operate over more channels than ever before. So as well as the fairly old-fashioned channels of integrating with your email, etc., and campaign email, of course now there are channels around social listening. There are channels around text message giving, channels around applications like WhatsApp and Facebook and etc., where people want to be able to engage through those channels. And again, if you're not able to service those channels, they'll either go elsewhere or they'll break out in self-defense and create a little silo. So what we get from the survey is essentially this: nonprofits have got higher expectations from their audiences. Everyone's expecting everything to be personalized, relevant, targeted, and are expecting to operate through more channels than ever before and with more audiences than ever before, whilst cutting costs. We all know the challenges in the sector at the moment, and unfortunately people are expected to cut costs while still meeting those higher expectations. What we find is that a tremendous number of organizations then become stuck, which is why they're still using systems that they're actually worried about don't have a good future and that they know are actually hindering them from being able to progress and respond to the demands of their supporters and other stakeholders. So that's just a little introduction into what we see in the sector from the survey and the research study. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Colette and Dan to talk about how some non-profits are actually responding to the challenges that we see. So guys, are you happy to take it on from there?
Yeah, very happy. Thank you, Alan. I'd like to start with, I guess, the catchphrase of 2020, which is that I hope everyone is safe and sane. And it seems to be something that we are saying and typing a lot, but I really mean it with a growing emphasis on sane, probably, because I'm in lockdown with a 1-year-old who's going through the terrible ones and may enter the room at any moment. So do bear that in mind. And I'm also aware that you all are under increasing pressures, and as our professional and personal lives are sort of colliding, you've probably got dogs to walk and children to homeschool and issues around furloughing staff and uncertain budgets. And we really appreciate the time you're giving us this morning to talk about our experience. So thank you for that. It's a slightly amended format, obviously, that we're remote. I would much prefer to be meeting with you face to face to hear more about your experiences, and the nature of this being a remote session inevitably means that Dan and I are going to be talking a bit more than we'd hoped for, but please do ask questions as we go along, and we'll leave time for that discussion and share more information directly. So Alan and the team at Heart Square posed Dan and I the question, which is, from aging systems to modern supporter engagement, how can fundraising technology enable our mission? And it's a really big question. It's a difficult one to cover in such a short period of time, but we're going to do our best by sharing our experience, but also our customers' experience. We'd very much hope to have a customer come and join us today, but as I said, those growing pressures that are on us all at the moment have prevented that from happening. So we'll do our best to share those insights. I think it's important, and forgive me for this, for me to share with you who Blackboard are by way of this one slide, and I promise it is just one slide. But we've been in the non-profit space, you know, our entire existence, and because we've been around forever, sometimes opinions on Blackboard can be slightly outdated. So by way of bringing you up to speed if you need it, Blackboard is the largest and leading cloud software company powering social good, which is of course a very nice, neat marketing tagline, but within there are some really important points, which is that we are a very large SaaS company. We work with over 45,000 organizations in every inhabited continent around the world. And as such, we have a very large R&D budget. So we're investing hundreds of millions of US dollars every single year into fundraising technology, and only to fundraising technology. We're dedicated to that space. Our solutions connect the entire social good community. We're perhaps best known in the UK for our CRM solutions, that we're working with charities, with higher educational and educational institutions, and with healthcare organizations to manage their CRM solutions. But we also work with foundations and grant-making organizations with our grant distribution application, measuring the outcomes and impact of funds that are being distributed. We work with corporations and companies with their volunteer schemes, with their corporate social responsibility, when they're fundraising on behalf of your organizations. And we also work with individuals, so change agents, philanthropists who are advocating and fundraising on our digital platforms such as Just Giving. So just to wrap that up, we're dedicated to social good. We provide purpose-built best-of-breed solutions that are built for fundraising and supporter engagement. I think you're in charge of slides, so if you can move along, thank you. When we at Blackboard are talking about fundraising technology, which is frankly all we do, we're talking about it in a few different ways. First of all, we talk about it being secure and compliant. Now, that's not groundbreaking, I realise. And whatever your CRM solution today is, I hope very much that it is secure and compliant. We're working with our organisations to make sure they're managing that very important data responsibly, transparently, and openly. But actually, as Alan touched on, you know, the kind of work that you have to do now expands much beyond the solutions that you own and control. And you have to be very mindful that when you're going out to environments that you aren't responsible for, that you're still having that secure and compliant responsibility in mind. The other thing we talk about is around continually evolving. And it's a really, really challenging sector that never sits still, and perhaps best demonstrated during this crisis. You need to invest in fundraising technology and with partners, crucially, who are in it with you for the long haul. You can't invest in a solution for 2020, 2021, 2022 needs. And we see this a lot. You need to plan, have a concrete plan for how that solution is going to evolve and change, and have insight into how you're going to adapt in the future. Again, we've seen that a lot where we work with organizations who've been backed into a corner and have bespoke a solution to meet their needs of 1998, And now we find ourselves in 2020 and they're not ready for the future of where fundraising's at. The other thing, and it's really key, is that good fundraising technology should directly influence fundraising revenue. And this is really the bottom line. Not all fundraising technology is created equal, and the best fundraising technology raises the most money. And that's really what we ultimately want to get out of this. More money means driving our mission further forward. And the final piece is that when it's enabled properly, fundraising technology creates a dialogue between your charity and your varied audiences. And that is a dialogue that is back and forth, it's two-way, it should be continual, and it's becoming increasingly challenging. Without order, that dialogue can become irrelevant chatter. It's just noise, and there is an increasing noise and increasing data that we're being presented with and we're having to make sense of. That increasing data is coming on the back of digital transformation. If you can move on, Alan, please. And undoubtedly, this is not a new concept to you, I'm sure. Digital transformation is happening across all industries, and it comes with increased expectations, as we've already alluded to, of your supporters, and they provide us with insights, both directly and indirectly, as to who they are, and they expect that we use that information to generate personal, targeted, relevant content in a timely manner. And this is vital for us not only to attract, but also to retain those supporters through the years. They also expect, thank you, for fundraising technology to be always on, always present. Supporters don't support us in office hours, and your staff, frankly, don't work in office hours anymore. I think that's been shown. We need this technology to be accessible at all times, no matter where we are. We also have, with the increasing amount of data that we have to make sense of, more broadly, the pace of innovation is changing, and it's driving challenges. It's requiring you and your teams to pivot and adapt day to day. The good news, and there is good news, is that it's also increasing the opportunity you have, and it's allowing us to look again at what we believe is possible. And when we at Blackboard went into lockdown at the end of March, you know, we were looking at a very grey outlook for April and May. We realised very quickly the huge impact that this pandemic was going to have on our customers. We knew very quickly that the marathon wasn't going to be happening. Little did we know that a 99-year-old man walking around his garden was going to become the single largest individual-led online fundraising campaign in history. And Colonel Tom Moore, as he is now, raised over £300 million for NHS Charities Together, processing from over 1.5 million individual supporters, putting a huge strain on our digital platforms. But at certain times, when we got through the initial success of Tom's campaign, it came to his birthday, and there were certain hours where we were taking over £2.5 million for NHS Charities Together from over 125,000 different individual transactions in a 60-minute space. At the same time, we were working with Virgin Money Giving and our friends at London Marathon Events to create and be part of the 2.6 challenge, which is ongoing and raising millions of pounds in lieu of the London Marathon. And I mention that because these are things that 4 weeks ago we couldn't have had the insight into. These are things that digital transformation make possible. Through hard work and innovation, we've been able to adapt to that. So digital transformation can bring a great deal of good. How do we harness it? With all this data, our time can be wasted on manually manipulating the information, moving it around, integrating, should I say, making it easy to exchange data with external sources. That's not a new concept. You know, we've talked about it forever and a day, and Alan talked to that too. I was not going to say 360-degree view of a supporter, but there you have it. We've talked about it for a long time. It's been possible for a long time, but it's been the reserve probably of larger nonprofits, enterprise-level nonprofits with resources and money to put to that. That is not the case any longer, and I really want you to leave the session today knowing that whatever the size of your organisation, being able to integrate and make use of this mass swathe of data that now exists out there is possible for everybody. The world has moved to the cloud, connectivity is better than ever, and solutions are being built for web consumption. And we've moved beyond integration into a concept that we refer to as interoperability. So interoperability, thanks Ellen, if you can move along. It's a bit of a buzzword at Blackboard. What is it? It's much more than integration, as I said. If we talk about integration, we limit ourselves to the notions of data exchanges, but this is solutions that are entirely interwoven and seamless to the user experience, to the consumer, to the supporter experience. Why is it important? Why are our customers talking about it so much? It's because through interoperability, we can advance your organization's mission without jeopardizing fundraising or compromising the supporter experience. And that's really key, because fundraising technology in lots of different guises can have a negative impact as well as a positive. And that doesn't mean done badly. It means that technology can be difficult to implement sometimes. And if we focus on perfect, sometimes we don't get done. And so there's lots of different ways to approach this. We'll talk through that, but no matter your chosen CRM solution, if you're on a legacy or an aging product today, if you choose best of breed, or if you choose a platform product, interoperability is always going to be needed. Data will always reside outside of your solutions. Supporters that exist in many different locations. You need to be able to complete the picture of your supporters so that you can best communicate with them in the way that they want to be communicated, in the information they want to hear in a relevant and timely manner. So this is not limited to a discussion about platform versus best of breed. But as we introduce the concept of interoperability, it's perhaps best examined through that exaggerated lens, bearing in mind we're a provider of best of breed solutions, so take that away. Interoperability and these kinds of concepts we're talking about today were often the domain of IT teams, and that gives us grave concern at Blackboard when we start projects like that. I'm sure you've come across it before, but when we start projects by looking at ultimately how we'll achieve it and the technology and the mechanisms that are in place, we typically end up with a solution that might be the best and fastest way of exchanging data, but doesn't necessarily answer the underlying concern. And so we're desperate to work with organizations who are led by fundraising with IT involved, importantly, and we've had great successes in that. But I'm going to start this session with a very loaded question, which is about how much does your IT team understand around your fundraising? It's a 1 to 10, with 1 being they're not having much idea at all, and 10 being they know it better than the fundraising team. We'd be really interested to see your relationship with your IT team.
Okay.
And this is also a test to see if you're still with me.
So the poll should be on your screen. We're starting to get some results through. This is anonymous, so if your IT team will never know what you think. But a very common challenge we get is the IT team will say, well, if you can log in, it's not my job to worry about it anymore. And there's a, you can understand their point of view, but that's not necessarily where business people in the organizations are coming from. Great, last few seconds, and I'm going to stop the poll and then just put the results up. So what we can see is a slightly terrifying result, which is that the most common result is people feeling that their IT team feel that, the delegates feel that their IT team has no understanding at all of the complexities of fundraising and the challenges that they're trying to address, given that IT is a fundamental, without which not element of meeting those challenges. That is pretty scary. Dan, Colette, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, well, I think it absolutely reinforces what we've seen from other organisations. And as you say, it is certainly terrifying given the huge importance of what we're all doing, what you're all doing with your fundraising. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in the coming minutes.
It emphasises very often when people are approaching us for help on the next steps or what they should do next, they actively seek to avoid the IT team. That's not in all organizations. Some are very business-like and forward-looking, but others, they actively seek to avoid them. Great.
Just on that point, Alan, I think that's the other extreme of where this can go wrong as well. We're not advocating for not including your IT teams. They're extremely important in these sorts of projects, and ultimately, if it's technology, we want to have them on board. We've seen the best projects have a really warm relationship between fundraising and IT, and if you can achieve that, then you're in a good place. Not easy, but yeah.
And of course, the thing obviously we need to realize is that those IT teams are often under a huge amount of strain and pressure with many competing projects. And so, I think part of it is really understanding how can we do more in our fundraising teams to help guide IT and to help really have that dialogue and that engagement with them. So I just wanted to kind of, take that step back really and ask, what's the point of all of this? Why is all of this important? And ultimately, why are our fundraising and supporter relations teams there? It's to further your organization's mission. And, every organization is of course going to have its different makeup and priorities, but broadly speaking, we consistently hear it's about bringing in and stewarding very significant income, raising funds for the agreed priorities of your organization, ultimately so you can deliver more value for your beneficiaries and ultimately drive that impact. Increasingly, there's also that kind of wider mission goal of also engaging in meaningful lifelong relationships with supporters, with beneficiaries and other stakeholders, not just from the financial perspective, because of the significant ongoing value and the delight that we can provide to them, but of course still aligned to what are your priorities as an organization. And then for every team, there will be additional things that you're doing to help advance the delivery of your own wider organization. You may have specific additional responsibilities that are part of your team as well. Next slide, Anne. And so really the key point here, and I think the really key point to emphasize with IT colleagues is, technology and data are a key enabler to furthering that mission, right? They're not an end in themselves. We don't try and build, CRM systems or ecosystems of technology because that's the end result. Ultimately, it's all to help drive our mission. And so if our priority here is to drive more fundraising income and to strengthen our engagement, that's absolutely where we've got to root our investment rather than the technology itself. But what technology and systems and data and processes can do, they help you to advance those goals. They ultimately help you to do things better and faster, to make smarter decisions. And of course, all the while making sure that we're absolutely respecting, the preferences, the desires of our audience, that we're being relevant to them. We're of course adhering to, any regulations as part of that. And ultimately, we're driving their needs as well as our own. Next slide, Anne. And so really, when we think about this, of course, there is no organization on this planet that has the perfect, ecosystem of technology where everything's working perfectly. We certainly aren't purporting that our technology does absolutely everything that an organization needs. So for any organization working with any providers, there are always going to be gaps. There are always going to be things that they want to do, they want to be able to do better, that they want to be able to strengthen and move forward their goal. And really then often they're faced with this choice of, well, do I try and customize it into my solution? Do I try and build something that's custom, whether that's in-house or working with a third-party provider, and try and build it to meet my needs? Or ultimately, do we connect these best of breed solutions that exist, that are out of the box, that manage all of these capabilities, and by connecting them together, we achieve the same end result, but without having to customize? And that's what we want to just talk a bit more about over the coming minutes. Next slide. But of course, the really important point here is it's not an all or nothing, right? It's not the case that an organization will either custom build everything or they'll try and integrate everything. There are always going to be these trade-offs. There are always going to be times when it absolutely makes sense to configure that out, to build those capabilities specific to your organization's needs. Every organization does have those nuances. But there are going to be other times where this interoperability story is absolutely, the best and quickest time to value. So, with any given project, it's about thinking about what's the right approach in this given occasion. And so when we think about, support to technology and, fundraising, or more broadly, development, supporter relations technology, you're thinking about it in three buckets. The first that people think about often is, well, it's about tracking things, right? The traditional database. And we're no longer in the world where it's about just having a database. Of course, you need to track that data. That's really important. But if it was just about that, actually, creating new fields to track more information, that'd be relatively straightforward. forward. But really where technology is so powerful today and helping non-profit organizations move forward, it's about actually technology to drive your processes, driving your workflows, your capabilities, driving more effective fundraising, helping to guide your teams to undertake all of those processes they need to do in order to ultimately achieve your mission. And that's much harder to build. That's much harder to build all of the sophistication of those processes, and that continues to get more complex over time. And what we're really seeing, and what we've seen a real growth of in the past few years, is increasingly the technology is also about helping you to discover things. It's bringing you business intelligence, it's bringing you insights, it's being built-in analytics that help you to make smarter, better decisions so that you can do things more effectively. And often that data is combining the insight from multiple organizations that are similar to yours or working in, across the sector and in many cases around the world, bringing all of that insight and intelligence together so that you can do things smarter yourselves. And that's almost impossible to customize. You can't collect that data for yourselves. So absolutely having that built in helps you to be more effective.
And just by way of an example to that, I guess, at the beginning of the session, we talked about this sector always changing. Here's some, regulatory and compliance changes that have happened in the last 4 years and are planned to change in the year ahead. These are all things that have had a huge impact on the technology that you use, on the business processes of your staff, and on the experience of your supporters. We're demonstrating the changes that are happening in fundraising here through regulation and compliance, because it's a nice broad stroke that affects us all probably in reasonably similar ways, but the changes are way beyond just regulation and compliance as well. We talk about things like donor motivations, channels of engagement, digital transformation that we've mentioned before. We've talked about global pandemics, cultures of giving, psychology of giving, and actually at Blackboard, it isn't just technology, because we're dedicated to this sector. We provide experience, expertise, services and implementation, but training, support, success, best practices, and sector insights to help you overcome these challenges. That was almost a sales pitch, and forgive me, but it needed to be said, sorry.
And so when we think about what the benefits that this will bring to your organization, it really kind of groups into two key areas. First of all, it's about helping you to do things more efficiently. So that's streamlining your administration, helping you be more connective. And of course, in the current environment we find ourselves, that's really important that you can connect with your technology wherever you are, and reducing data entry. When you have these supporters coming in from all parts of your organization, how do you make sure that that data is updating all parts so that you're not having to duplicate effort? But it's also about helping you be more effective. It's about improving the quality of the service you're providing to your customers, your stakeholders, your beneficiaries, your supporters. And it's about, as I say, deepening that insight so you can make better decisions. And so, this is really the goal of the kind of connected office that we see, with the right ecosystem of systems and software and operations. It's going to help you to be more efficient and more effective. And so really, coming back to what we talked about earlier, there are these two different approaches. And just to delve into them a little bit more, the idea of building a single system, some of the primary challenges of trying to do that, it can be very high initial costs to build out that customization. But perhaps more importantly is the time it takes. When we recognize that we're trying to raise funds, we're trying to engage our constituents, if we take longer to get to that goal, ultimately that has a real opportunity cost. It's increasing the time to value, and that is costing our organization money. But perhaps the most significant point is that actually there are these significant business as usual development costs. So when you get to go live, that's actually just the start. What about all of the ongoing changes? How do you continue to maintain and update all of those customizations? How do you make sure, as regulation evolves, as we saw, you really get that benefit into your organization without you having to do that work? And so what we're increasingly seeing nonprofit organizations work towards is actually how you can connect your systems together. So how you can have these best of breed solutions, but be sharing all of the relevant data between them so that you get that holistic, valuable insight. Of course, it's not without its own challenges. You've got to create some really robust rules around data primacy and how you match and merge that data together. Which is the source system of truth? What do you do when you have conflicting data? And of course, you've got to know where to start, where to prioritize, which are the integrations or the business intelligence that's going to deliver you the most value. Next slide. And so we're going to focus more on this interoperability approach. And again, this is not an all or nothing, but what we traditionally saw in space as we go back 5-10 years or more is a lot of manual import and export. A lot of people trying, as Alan says, to bring all this data from these different disparate systems and continually trying to import that information. And that can be easy to get going, and you can transform and edit the data as much as you wish. But the real challenge of that is that requires such an ongoing manual effort, right? And it's prone to error. And what happens when you're in an environment such as today, where you no longer have that, direct access to the office? Does that mean those processes stop? What happens when staff turn over? So it really is prone with a lot of longer term risks. Whereas actually, we're increasingly seeing non-profit organizations move towards automation of their integration so that actually these flows of data between systems are happening, through APIs on a near real-time basis. So they absolutely have that insight and they don't need to intervene. And yes, of course, there's an initial, cost there to get that set up, but the benefits really, really do reap themselves over time. Next slide. And so we wanted to move to a second poll with you all and really get a sense of, for you on the call, how important is interoperability to your charity at present? Again, on a scale of 1 to 10, so 1 not at all and 10 being essential to your organization's success.
Okay, so you should see the options up in front of you, and we've got some answers coming through. So it's how important is it to you? And if you don't think it's important, then it's 1, and if you do think it's really important, then it's 10. Oh, great! I'm going to end the polling. So what we find is for the great majority of people, interoperability, or maybe describing it as being able to have access to all of your data and to be enabled by having access to your data is extremely important for the majority of people. There's somebody didn't think it's very important, and there's a preponderance from the middle upwards who do think it's highly important, but maybe not mission critical. Dan, Colette, did you want to add anything to that?
I think I would say, yeah, I mean, obviously we're introducing maybe a new concept in the language we're using, but like you say, being able to share and see all that data, I think is something that does impact our customers, certainly. Where we've seen it work really well, I can think of a good example. So we worked very recently implementing a new CRM solution with Shelterbox, who are a disaster relief organization. You can imagine that they're moving from crisis to crisis and having to fundraise, vast amounts of money, at the drop of a hat. What they wanted to do is have a very future-proof solution that can allow them to create interoperability between their apps, between the website, between microsites and digital platforms. But they could not compromise their ability to fundraise and bring in that revenue because, it's ultimately saving lives, like many of your organizations are. And so they implemented a project and went about, with our best of breed solution, out of the box, 80% of the products there, rest assured fundraising is secured. And then it allows us that stable platform to innovate and be creative with interoperability. And it's proven to be a huge success for them. But yes, the results, we can talk, I guess, to another slide where we did this. We surveyed our customer base and we had a reasonably similar response on the next slide.
Yeah, so we're seeing 60% there in that poll we've just done now, just now voted 8, 9 or 10, and seeing 30% of you saying it's 10 out of 10 in terms of importance. That absolutely tallies with the what we saw in February, where again those were absolutely the most common answers. So it is really important, and all organisations need to be working out how they can deliver that. So Alan, next slide.
We're going to another poll immediately, which is just making sure that you're still with us, which is around what data you think would have the most value for you to exchange. And, we're limited here by multiple choice, so we're just trying to get a feel from you. But yeah, the same responses, multiple choice would be great.
Okay, and then, so what we have is, Great. So if people are able to see the poll, what are your most important channels within your organization, and what data has the most value? Great. I'll give it a couple more seconds, and then I'll stop the polling. And it is multiple choice, so you can answer more than one. Great. Okay, and then I'll just share the results. Interestingly, the most important channel is the website, and I'll say very interestingly, because we agree, campaign email and click-throughs are very, very important, but the website is extremely important. We're running another webinar on this, but the interesting thing is that the charity space is many years behind other areas of the not-for-profit space in terms of integration to the website. We talk to really large charities all the time who are still really stuck on the question of whether to have a highly personalized area, a logged in area of their website. They're not, whereas everyone else elsewhere in the not-for-profit sector is talking about how to make it better. They're into their second and third generation of personalization and logged in areas. Other in the charity space, they're still stuck on the question of, is this a barrier, and you know, is it going to stop people proceeding? Dan, Colette, do you have any comments as well, please?
Yeah, I think very much, you know, what we're seeing, of course, from the perspective that it needs to be multi-channel, right? But that, you know, increasingly it's not just about email, it's about all of these other channels as well. And we'll talk a little bit about those in the coming couple of minutes.
Great, thank you. So let's move on from there.
So we'll move quite quickly for this next section, because I think absolutely we've all made this same point, that having this fully connected digital ecosystem between your online supporter experience, the way in which all of your supporters and beneficiaries and other stakeholders are engaging with you, the connection to that back to your technology and your data is absolutely essential.
Yes, and I think we listed out website, email, social. For us, this is table stakes, and I think integration to these kind of digital platforms, they're not nice to have, they're absolutely essential for everybody, as I said, all size of organization. I noticed there's been questions about the size of organizations that we work with, and it's a very broad spectrum for us. We provide through all of our CRM solutions fully integrated online integration, drag and drop build for these forms, as well as integration, of course, the digital to the Just Giving platform. We'll move through these slides reasonably quickly, Alan, aware of time. Built-in email, built-in workflow to help manage those business processes. Someone gives a gift of over £500, they go through a certain business process, they receive this email that's more personalised and engaging and perhaps around that campaign. If they open that email, we go on to send them this communication. If they don't, maybe we point them towards some other information. And we can do that all natively within our solutions. But let's not forget, there's also the opportunity for interoperability and exchange with, you know, solutions outside of the Blackboard product set. We talk about social posting within our solutions, of course, really important. But I think, again, I'll come back to Tom Moore as being, you know, a huge example of the kind of digital engagement and how hugely impactful that can be. So, of course, we can communicate and allow our consumers to push this messaging out. And it's probably through that methodology that this campaign became so viral and so big so quickly, allowing supporters to share the message and the success that Tom's having. And NHS Charities together, and we're working with them now to take all of that information that we've gleaned from over, you know, 1.5 million supporters to work with how we engage those contacts moving forward. It's, you know, this is an extreme stretched example, but this can happen to all of your organizations. And the last thing I would say, and it's not really about interoperability, but when you have interoperability and you have automation working for you, it becomes hugely important to be able to understand what's happening in your database at any given moment. And so again, all of our solutions provide fully integrated embedded business intelligence tools, so you can see in near real time what's going on. You can see that viral campaign happening, you know, for you, and you can understand by drilling through these details, who's giving, why they're giving, how can we recreate these successes in the future. So we're coming up to the Q&A time. I just want to wrap up by summarising some of the things that we've covered here, and I realise it's pretty fast-paced, forgive me. But HeartScale are challenging us to talk to these areas really. Digital transformation is increasing support or expectation. And you know, you have these more sophisticated requirements to be able to meet that demand. We are providing born in the web, modern platforms with interoperability at the core. And today's session is not a sales pitch, so we don't want to, we haven't shown you how we do that. If it's of interest, we'd love to, you know, share more insight, but that's not what we want to do. Secondly, meeting the requirements of that digital transformation is made harder by older systems. I agree that it is. There are ways to get around that. You know, there are lots of organizations who are sitting on legacy solutions and have data warehouses that sit across the top of that. I don't think it's the ideal, but you know, it can work for you. We believe that, you know, digital integration like website, email, social listening is absolutely key, and that's why we provide that out of the box. The second thing, last thing should I say, is that we understand that you have very, very complex needs. Your IT teams don't necessarily, but we know that that exists, and high volume, not just for enterprise level organizations, but for all of your organizations, is something that our solutions are built to deal with. Performance in mind. I've talked about the Just Giving platform and the performance we've seen through that in the last few weeks, but you know, we work with British Heart Foundation, who are transacting over 150,000 direct debits every single month. We're implementing Macmillan, YHA. We work with University of Oxford, UCL, Birmingham, Shelterbox Site Savers, who have huge volumes going through our solutions, and that's not a concern. We've built our solutions with that in mind. The fundamental foundations have that at their core. If we just move on to the next slide, complex income management is a given. And I think we've talked a little bit about best of breed versus platform. But making certain that you have everything you need to deal with very, very fundamental fundraising concepts like split gifts, soft crediting, match giving, amendments, you know, crediting fundraisers, receipting, direct debit processing, stock, property, legacy, tribute. These are all things that need to remain and work properly for you. And this is something that if you go about building or a solution for fundraising can be very challenging to maintain and bring up to speed. And then the final thing I'll ask Dan to talk to, which is around complex integrations that exist. And we've touched on some of these already.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things around, you know, there are obviously organizations where year round you'll have a high volume. You'll also have, of course, organizations where you will absolutely have these peaks. So, you know, think about examples like Canadian Red Cross, an organization we work with, you know, when a disaster hits, absolutely, you could be overnight having to suddenly transform to processing, you know, tens or hundreds of thousands of donations compared to 2 days before, whereas a much lower volume. And to be able to scale up and down is also another kind of key requirement that you need to be able to support. So across all of our customers, we see an increasing array of really exciting examples of integrations that are working. So of course, that integration between our solutions is, themselves, you know, examples like Just Giving and behavioral emails and, you know, fundraiser performance management, connecting all of those together for those organizations that are also grant making, being able to pull that story in as well. But really importantly to that wider ecosystem of good, huge number of our organizations are powered by both our technology and Microsoft technology. Really great example of the Museum of London, where they've connected their Blackboard fundraising solution with their Microsoft Dynamics for powering their ticketing and memberships. And so all of their memberships are powered through Dynamics, and then a real-time two-way integration to share the data in both directions. And that's also connecting in their Power BI information and their Spectrix ticketing as well. So really good example of where they've connected their ecosystem, and many more examples of customers that are being able to connect their Microsoft technology to their Blackboard. And we have that very strong global partnership for that reason. And then there are so many other amazing best of breed charity solutions out there, whether it's handling your financial accounting, your case management, your beneficiaries management, volunteering, memberships, you know, for those in university organizations, of course, that whole student experience, and having best of breed integrations to connect that together. And we have so many successful examples of customers who are now doing that much more in a real-time fashion. And then, of course, there are almost infinite number of other third-party connectors. You know, some, of course, like HMRC Gift Aid and Backs for direct debit are absolutely fundamental. And then, of course, other solutions like we have, many customers who have integrated their Salesforce with their fundraising solution, Blackboard, or of course their website, whether that's on WordPress or Drupal, whatever it may be, and just so many other technologies you can now connect in. And we're seeing more and more examples of customers who are being able to bring all of this together. And if you want to reach out to us afterwards to find out more about any of these, really happy to connect you to some specific customers for that particular example.
Great. Great. Thank you very much, Dan and Colette. That was great. And a really interesting overview of just how many sources of data that are given the not-for-profit has to deal with, and of course the complexity of what they have to do with that data, which kind of goes to the heart of the challenges we're seeing not-for-profits facing at the moment, and why so many are asking the question, where do I get started? What on earth is the best use of my money, presuming I have any, to be the most enabled version of ourselves. We've got some questions that have come through on the Q&A, and my learned colleague Rebecca, I think, is going to take us through some of the Q&A questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, Alan. So actually, you just mentioned there about kind of starting and how do I get started. And one of the questions is, can the system attract a donor base from scratch? For example, for a small or medium-sized charity who doesn't have an existing donor base or donor attraction scheme?
I'll ask Dan and Colette to talk about that, because it started with the system.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if we think about both the kind of acquisition stage that we're talking about here, and then the retention stage of supporters, unless you can attract them in the first place, you don't earn the right to that second stage. And so, a number of tools, perhaps the most obvious, of course, is through Just Giving. So that's part of our Blackboard solution that absolutely enables you to connect to new audiences, and quite often through the networks and the power of the network effect of those you have connections to, who they are connected to. And once you bring those initial donations through, it is then about how do you steward those in order to build a relationship that you can then, ultimately, transfer them from a single gift to a regular gift, and build that longer term relationship. Colette, do you want to add?
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that supporters, and like everybody, when we're engaging in this digital world, we're looking for experience, and I think we've seen huge success through virtual events and the digital services that we provide on the Just Giving platform. So 2.6 Challenge is a great example of that, where we're allowing people to, with fitness integration, record the one piece of fitness they're doing every day to build up to their marathon. And so we're allowing people to have a greater experience that's more personalized and engaging, but also we're creating this sense of community on the Just Giving platform. That acquisition then, once we start looking at the data in CRM, we have tools for benchmarking. And so because we are dedicated to nonprofit, we have a view onto our customers' data that we can say, XYZ charity, your retention figures are lower than organizations who are making the same kind of profit as you. Here are some resources and best practices that we can guide you through. And that's in product. We share that insight right there within the solution so that you can adapt and build and learn from what our other customers are doing also.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose I'm aware of time. So someone has asked, again, in terms of the charities and clients that Blackboard has, is there a sense of how many charities, or just a sense of those that you work with, turnover of under $1 million or under 500K that you work with?
Well, I can answer that for the UK. So £1 million is normally around the division where my team start working with an organisation. So we have just over half of our organisations who are working with our CRM solutions. So there's around 500 that our emerging team work with. That's on CRM solutions, of course. If we talk about Just Giving, then we're working with 30,000 organisations, predominantly across the UK, but around the world now increasingly. So there's a lot. Dan, you can probably talk to the broader spectrum.
Yeah, very much that cross section, and the reason that we have varied technology solutions is for organisations at that different stage of their journey, because you do have different needs. And then right up to organisations that are raising several £100 million a year through fundraising, that we're absolutely powering those. So many of the largest fundraising organisations around the world are using our technology. So absolutely, that's scaling up.
Great, thank you. I mean, one of the challenges we find is that a lot of the great majority of charities registered with the Charity Commission are absolutely tiny. The whole staff would fit in a phone box at the same time, more or less. And of course, their discretionary spend is very low. So I think that's where the question comes from. You know, how do those kind of organisations find something that addresses the complexities that we've been talking about? Okay, and then Rebecca, I think there's another question.
Yep, so there's just one more, a little bit about the system again. So about whether the system covers CRM for beneficiaries. So does it track beneficiaries, collect information on different criteria such as age, ethnicity, postcode, length of employment, and then what kind of reports can be produced to analyse the data, such as social impact?
It's a very difficult question to answer with a simple answer. I guess the simplest answer would be yes. We, like, as Dan alluded to, we actually have a number of different CRM solutions, so it really depends on your organization's needs, but ultimately everything you've talked about there can absolutely be recorded and measured upon. And, you know, we talk about beneficiaries. We have CRM solutions for fundraising, but we also touched on it before. We also have, if you're a grant distribution organization, you want to be able to measure that impact. We report on impacts in line with the United Nations, what's the word, Dan? I'm going to forget it. Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you. Sustainable Development Goals. So you can see within your solution actually where impact is being had across those fundamental and shared goals of other organizations as well.
Great, thank you very much. So we've just hit the time, or a minute over. So I want to thank all of the delegates for attending the webinar and for the Q&A questions. And I'd really like to thank our panel, Colette and Dan, for taking us through the insights. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. I hope you have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.